Hello and welcome to the Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. We're going to return to our Final Fantasy series coverage. However, we will be taking a short jump out of Final Fantasy itself, and we're going to cover a video game that came out in 1995 called Chrono Trigger. Now, the reason I lumped this in with the Final Fantasy games is it was created with the help of Hironobu Sakaguchi, who is the creator of Final Fantasy. And also, when this was re-released eventually on the PlayStation 1, it was kind of lumped into a game cartridge with Final Fantasy 4. And that was a group called the Final Fantasy Collection, or I'm sorry, the Final Fantasy Chronicles. And that had both Final Fantasy 4 and Chrono Trigger on it. So even Square is kind of considering this very similar to one of their Final Fantasy games. So we're going to cover it here as kind of a quick breather between Final Fantasy 6 and 7, because Final Fantasy 6 was a long one, and I'm sure Final Fantasy 7 will take a bit of work. So we'll just jump and do a little bit of Chrono Trigger in between, just have something a little easy to talk about, and something that does kind of go along with that Final Fantasy theme. So give it just one moment, we'll start talking about that. Like I mentioned before, Chrono Trigger came out in 1995. It was released on the Super Nintendo system. It came out pretty much the year after Final Fantasy VI did. So this would be kind of Square Enix's last hurrah before jumping over into the PlayStation with Final Fantasy VII. So again, the reason I'm kind of lumping this in with Final Fantasy VII is this was created by a dream team that contained Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was the creator of Final Fantasy. It also had Yuji Horii, who was the creator of the Dragon Quest series, which was Enix's main competition with Final Fantasy back in the late 80s, early 90s. Between those two series, that Dragon Quest was actually a bigger series in Japan, whereas Final Fantasy was the bigger one here in the States. And then the third part of this dream team was Akira Toriyama, and he is the author of the Dragon Ball manga. So that was coming out back in those days, which of course led to Dragon Ball Z and a lot of stuff that's still going on these days. So those three were considered Square's dream team at this time. And so it was released on Super Nintendo, like I said, 1995. It was re-released in 2001 as part of the Final Fantasy Chronicles, along with Final Fantasy IV, as I mentioned before. And it also has had DS releases on the Nintendo DS. Most recently, it's been released on the mobile phone platforms as of 2018. So you can pick this game up quite a few places at this point. And that mobile phone version of it is pretty much a copy of some of the re-releases that came out on the Nintendo DSs back in the day. So the gameplay for this one's a little different than your normal Final Fantasy game. So you still have a world map like you do in Final Fantasy, but there's no random battles on the world map. The battles are only in your dungeon areas, and the battles are a little different too. They're not just random in battles as you're walking around. These are, as you're walking in areas of the screen, you will see enemies moving around on screen. If you interact with those enemies, or if you get close to those enemies, you'll jump into a battle. There's no separate battle screen. You just kind of get into the fighting stances right there on the dungeon screen as you're navigating around. And so things that are similar, your levels, your experience, you're finding treasures throughout these dungeons. The battles are active time battles, just like we've seen in the most recent Final Fantasy games. A little different here. Your magic and like special abilities are all kind of grouped together in this technique system. So you have a tech system that uses your magic points, and you have magic spells that way. You'll also have special attacks kind of that way too, and each character has their own kind of special attack. You can also do dual techs, where two characters can kind of join together to do an attack. You can also do triple tech, where all three characters on the battlefield will join together to have an attack. Which leads to your characters that you can battle with at any given time are 3 in this game. Which, considering the size of the dungeon maps and the way that the battles work, if you had more than that, it would get very complicated on the screen. It'd be a lot of stuff on the screen. But with 3 characters and the enemies you fight, you're able to not complicate things too much. But thing that kind of makes Chrono Trigger stand out a lot, one of the biggest selling points of it, were the multiple endings that you can have depending on how you defeat the game. Majority of those endings are actually unlockable after you defeat the game once. There's one of the first instances we see of a new game plus system, where once you beat the game, you can play it again with all of your items, all of your experience, all of your equipment, stuff like that, and try to beat it in different ways at different times, and you'll have different endings depending on how you do. All right, so getting into the story of Chrono Trigger, a lot of the story revolves around time travel, and it really utilizes that trope to kind of see, like, you'll see similar areas at different levels of time. You'll see the differences that take place in these areas. So we begin in 1000 AD. Chrono, who's your main character, and his friend Luca travel to the Millennial Fair, where Chrono will meet Marle. Marle is actually the princess of that area, but she's in disguise, so you don't actually know this right away. Her name's actually Nadia, but she's in disguise as Marle. And so Chrono, just talking about him, he's one of your strongest fighters, uses swords. He also is, his magic is kind of lightning based, so he does have some magic eventually. Not all the characters start with magic. You get magic at a specific point in the game where all of a sudden all these characters are able to learn different kind of magic spells. Now the techniques, those you can learn throughout the game. So those aren't magic based, they're just, your special skills pretty much. Luca, she's got fire magic eventually, and she uses guns, a lot of kind of tech equipment. She's very techy. She does experiments and builds robots and stuff like that. And then Marle uses bow and arrows, and she's probably your strongest overall magic user. She's got ice magic and also a lot of healing magic as well. So anyway, you got these three characters at the beginning. Luca has created a kind of a teleportation device that somehow malfunctions, and instead of being a teleportation device, it is a time machine all of a sudden. And what happens is Marle gets in, she's trying to try out the teleport, and she disappears in time. So we have to follow her, and we end up in 600 AD. So in 600 AD, we see it's very similar to 1000 AD, but 400 years older. The village looks very similar still. There's a castle still the same way it was in the 1000 AD. So we go to the castle and we find what looks like Marle, but everybody's calling her Princess Lyn. And so what we find out is that they found Marle and have mistaken her for their missing princess, who is Lyn. And so Chrono and Luca are kind of working together to save the actual missing princess so that we can save Marle from the castle. And we meet the disgraced knight Frog. Now, Frog actually looks like a human-sized frog. It's kind of an interesting character choice, but he is cursed to look like a frog, that's why. And he's a strong fighter as well. He does come with water magic and some healing skills as well to go with him. So with Frog's help, we're able to rescue Princess Lyn, get Marle from the castle, and we travel back to our normal time of 1000 AD. Now, when we get back to 1000 AD, unfortunately, we are arrested because we kidnapped the princess. We took off with her, and they don't want to hear the fact that, she was caught in a time travel thing, and we went after her and saved her. They don't want to hear any of that. We're under arrest. So Luca and Marle are able to help Chrono get out of jail. We escape, and we're all kind of running away from the king's forces, including Marle. She's like, don't want anything to do with you guys anymore. I'm running off with them. And we find another time gate. So we jump in, and we end up in 2300 AD. So we're in the future, and it's very post-apocalyptic. We're like, what the heck's happened between our time and here that is like this? And we find a video that shows us that back in 1999 AD, a creature Lavos attacks the Earth and just scorches it. And that's why everything is a wasteland at this point. We decide that we're going to prevent this from happening because we have these time travel skills. Let's use them to good use. Let's go ahead and stop this from taking place. While we're in the future, we find a robot named Robo, and he joins us to help be able to stop Lavos as well. And he's a strong fighter. He doesn't have magic skills, but he's got a lot of technique skills, including some healing techniques as well. We're able to find another portal, and we end up in a place called the End of Time, which anytime you're doing time travel, evidently, if you have more than 3 people doing the time travel, you're going to automatically be popped into this little middle space area called the End of Time. Find an old man there who tells us a little bit about this. There's also a little side door that we go in, we'll be granted our magic. So we now have where lightning spells are on Chrono. Marle has her ice spells. Luca has her fire spells. Robo does not have any magic ability at this point. Eventually, we'll want to bring Frog back here once we get him again so that he can learn his water spells. So there is literally like a bucket with a little glowing dot in it that if we go and interact with that, we'll be sent to go fight Lavos right then. So at any point in the game at this point, if we want to go fight Lavos, we can. It would be crazy right now because we're very underleveled. We only have a few characters. It would be really tough, but you certainly could. And that's, if you're wanting to see some of the different endings of the game, these are the times where you can do it. Most likely when you're playing a New Game Plus and you have a lot more levels and a lot more characters and techniques. So we travel back to 600 AD because we've heard that back then there was a wizard named Magus who was summoning Lavos, and we want to try to stop him from summoning Lavos. We think that maybe that's the reason why Lavos attacked the world in 1999. So we find Frog, we collect the Mass Immune Sword for him, which kind of he sees as a sign that maybe he's not the disgraced knight that needs to be in hiding, but that he should come out and fight, and we should go take on Magus. Magus is actually the one who cursed him to be a frog, so he has a vendetta against him. And so we go through Magus's castle, and we're able to interrupt the summoning, but when we do so, we are blown out into a different time-altering gate, and we are now in prehistoric times, 15 million BC to be exact. So we meet a character named Ayla here, who helps us to get back to, who's going to help us get back to our time. Now, she is a very strong fighter. She's probably the overall strongest fighter. Not a lot of magic skills, but a lot of good technique skills. And she actually has some really good dual techniques with Chrono that come in really handy pretty much from here throughout the rest of the game, actually. While we're in this prehistoric time, we see Lavos crash from space. He's like a space alien. He crashes into the Earth. He burrows down the middle of the Earth, and that's how he first came to Earth. Somehow between here and 1999, he gains strength and comes out and attacks. But right now, he is in the Earth as early as 15 million BC. So we're able to find a gate, and this gate will actually send us to 12,000 BC, and that's where we'll pick up next. So in 12,000 BC, there's kind of a magical kingdom who is drawing power from Lavos down in the center of the Earth. They're finding a way to kind of drain power up from him while he's hibernating. Unfortunately, doing so accidentally wakes him up. Magus shows up. He has kind of been hiding in this world as well. He tries to defeat Lavos, but is unable to. So Lavos ends up attacking everybody. Chrono, of all people, our lead character Chrono, dies from this Lavos attack. And so Chronos is gone. We kind of escape. We go back to where we can kind of reconvene and regroup. We find Magus, and Magus explains to us that he was originally a child in this time, this 12,000 BC. And when Lavos awoke there, it threw him out to the 600 AD, which is where he was when we found him, and killed his sister. So he was trying to summon Lavos so he could kill him as revenge for his sister. So we can choose whether we're going to fight Magus, which, you know, he has cursed Frog. He's done some terrible things. We definitely have the option of doing that. Or we can choose to let him join us. And he is a very strong magic user. He has all the magic skills, the fire, the ice, the lightning, all of it. And he's also a really strong fighter as well. He's kind of best of both worlds. You can use him for a lot of things. He doesn't have the really cool dual and triple text, but he has some really good text of his own that makes him a strong character to have. And so we kind of start wrapping up for some of our end portions, but first, maybe we should see if we can get our main character back. So we go through this series of quests that we have to go through to try to not necessarily resuscitate Chrono, there's no way of doing that, but to try to prevent his death to begin with. We are time travelers after all, right? So eventually we were able to find a doppelganger of Chrono. It's kind of like a walking doll of Chrono. So we travel back in time to right before that Lavos attacks happens. We stick the doll there in place. You grab Chrono and we take off, and we've saved Chrono's life. Now we have our main character back again. Awesome. Cool thing at this point, you can have any of your three characters playing. You're not locked into your main character Chrono like you were throughout most of the game, and like you will usually be when you're playing like Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy VIII. You're almost always locked into having your main character be part of that three-person team. In this case, at this point, we can have whatever three characters we want, which is pretty fun. Especially when you're trying to build up those dual techniques or triple techniques and use those in battle. You know, you want to be able to have whatever three characters you want. So at this point, multiple side quests are available to go through, but really in-game proceedings start now. Once you've got Chrono, and you don't have to bring him back at all. If you want to go fight Lavos without Chrono, you're welcome to. You can skip that. The bringing him back to life is almost like a side quest in itself. So this kind of goes with that multiple different ways of defeating Lavos. There are multiple ways to attack him. You can do it through that bucket at the end of time. You can do it on like a flying time machine that we've created during the game. We can go attack him that way. There's a big void area that we can go through and attack him. There's different ways to get to him. And depending on how you go attack him, you can also have some different endings as well. But anyway, we get to Lavos, we defeat him, we get whatever ending we got, and then we have that option of the New Game Plus, where we can start a game again with all of our equipment, all of our experience. We're much stronger, and there's different points in the game now where we can attack Lavos in the game and get a different ending. And there's something like 13 to 15. I don't know. There's a bunch of different endings you can get depending on when you attack him. And then yeah, that kind of ends you to the end point of the game. So Legacy of Chrono Trigger. This was the best-selling game in Japan in 1995. It's one of the best-selling RPGs of all time, actually. Called by many people one of the best games of all time. I will say I enjoy it a lot. I find it fun. I do not think it's one of the best games of all time. I think there's at least half a dozen Final Fantasy games I'd rank ahead of it. That being said, it's definitely a fun game. A cute story. I wouldn't say the story was hugely intriguing, but just a fun story. The technique... gameplay part of it is pretty fun, having the dual techniques and stuff like that. It's kind of light on side quests, to be honest, and I enjoy a lot of side quests in my games. Just give me extra stuff to do. It's things that I love to do. But, the endings was a big draw for a lot of people. The replayability of playing it over and over and getting these different endings would draw a lot of people in. So, there was a sequel that came out in 1999 on a PlayStation 1 called Chrono Cross. I've heard great things about this as well. I myself have never played it, so eventually I'll have to try to see if I can fill in that gap in my gameplay. But so obviously this did well enough that they made more. I think Chrono Cross is actually having some sort of a re-release pretty soon if it hasn't already. So that one has been released again since that PlayStation 1 day. So again, right now, if you want to play Chrono Trigger, you can get on your phone. You can get on a lot of different Nintendo systems. You can pretty much find it on Steam if you're doing it through PC as well. Fun game. A lot of people think it's one of the best games of all time. I think it's just a very fun game that's enjoyable and a nice little side trip to get off of our Final Fantasy series for a bit. And we will return with Final Fantasy VII. I will say spring break is next week, so I will not guarantee Final Fantasy VII will be out by next week. But I will have that being worked on, and we'll hopefully have that out here for us in not too long. Thank you for listening to me ramble, and we will talk again soon.